I've been on the deep web many times before, but the creepiest thing that ever happened to me took place about a year ago. One night, I was especially bored, and I was in a chat room where a user sent me a link to a game. He said it was a sort of code-breaking game, and I had heard about some of those in the past, and I wanted to know what they were like. When I got the link, I clicked on it, and it led me to an all-black screen with yellow letters that said "Begin." I clicked it, and nothing happened for quite some time. There was just text on the screen that said "Wait." It took a few minutes, but finally the game started. Things started out relatively normal. There was a few sort of codes that were easy to figure out, and suddenly the game seemed to stop. The screen just went black, and it was a little strange, but I moved on at that point. I got off my computer and went to do other stuff. 2 days went by, and I got a random letter in the mail. I opened it up to see a blank white piece of paper folded up. When I unfolded it, it revealed a web address. I went on my browser that I used to access the deep web, and I typed in the address. I realized that it seemed to be a continuation of the game that I had been playing. It had a button on it which I clicked. Then it started playing a video. It was a surveillance video of some kind. The more I watched it, the more I could tell it was a Walmart. The video followed someone walking into the store eventually. It was security camera footage, so the quality wasn't the greatest, but after about 5 seconds, I realized the person it was showing was myself. I had been to the store the day before, and the video followed me throughout the store, and even showed me checking out and leaving. It then changed to a gas station security camera, a gas station that I had also been to the day before. It showed me getting gas and once again leaving. The video then ended, and after that the web page went all black. Text then appeared on the screen saying, "Level 2, and then an option to begin. I didn't have any interest in playing this game any longer, and I exited out of my web browser. I was pretty creeped out, but I knew the dangers of the deep web, and that these sort of things could be done, so after that, I decided to stay away from it for a while. I do sometimes wonder, though, what Level 2 was. This story takes place a few years ago when I was in high school. I was about 15 at the time and was home with my older brother who was a senior in high school. It was a rainy night and our parents were both gone. We were sort of bored and had always been a little curious about the deep web, so we decided to go on it and give it a try. My brother said he knew how to access it, and we used an old computer in the basement because we were afraid of potentially getting hacked or something. Still, we were very curious, so after my brother was able to get into the deep web, we searched around some random stuff before finding a chat room. We talked a little bit in the chat room to some people, and before long, we were sent a link by a user with no context. I warned my brother not to click the link, but he did anyways. As soon as it was clicked, the computer locked up. Then the screen went all black. It caused the whole room to go pitch black, as we had all the lights off in the basement and could only hear rain falling from outside. We thought the link had crashed the computer and maybe even broke it. I figured it was some sort of prank by the user. My brother tried pressing several keys and even moving the mouse around, but nothing happened. We decided to leave the basement and went back upstairs, thinking we had broken the old computer. We discussed what to do for a couple minutes and then went back downstairs. But when we entered the room that the computer was in, we froze. The computer screen had what appeared to be a man in a really creepy clown mask with a black background. He was just staring into the screen and smiling. We thought it was some sort of creepy video, until the clown pointed at my brother. My brother moved farther away, and the clown continued to point at him as my brother went across the room. This caused my heart to start pounding. The clown then turned and pointed at me, and then waved his finger for me to come closer to the screen. My brother then quickly ran up and covered the webcam that we had on our computer. Then he yelled at me to turn off the computer. I ran up and pressed the power button, but the clown stayed on the screen. Nothing was happening. I then went to the wall and unplugged the whole power strip from the wall outlet, and the computer finally turned off. We both had to take a minute or two to catch our breath. We left the old computer in the basement unplugged for a few days, but afterwards it seemed to work just fine. When I was a little younger, I had just gotten my own place for the first time, and I went on the deep web for the first time as well. I had heard about it for a long time when I was a kid, and I guess my curiosity eventually got the better of me. When I went on, I searched for games because I wanted to know the kind of games that were on the deep web. I've always been a bit of a gamer. I explored many different websites, just kind of browsing around. They had a lot of pretty normal types of games, and then a few weird ones as well. Over the next week or so, I explored the deep web and played around with a few games. Then one day, I came across this really weird-looking game that was sent to me in one of the gaming forums I went on. I clicked on the game, and I saw that the graphics were sort of crude and looked like the 3D graphics from an early 90s video game. I decided to play the game, and when it started, I was a character in a house. I walked around the house for a little bit, and realized that the house in the game looked exactly like my house in real life. Obviously, the graphics weren't the best, but it was blowing my mind how accurate it was. Things from tables and chairs to where my TV and couch were was completely accurate. I was getting really creeped out the more I walked around the house in the game, and I didn't know how this was possible for anyone to know all this information. Then, out of nowhere in the game, I saw another user come in. It was someone wearing all black and a ski mask, and they were in my house. I started to run away from them in the game, and then it started to glitch out really bad. The game ended up freezing up and then crashing about a minute later. The experience was enough for me to want to be done with the deep web. I ended up deleting the browser I'd used to go on it after that. A couple of days later, though, I woke up in the middle of the night to a notification on my phone. It was my doorbell security camera detecting activity at the front door. I nervously clicked on it to see what it could be, hoping for nothing. But when I clicked it, I saw a man dressed in all black and a ski mask walking up to the front door. He just stood there for a little while and looked into the camera. He then waved slowly and turned around and walked away. I kept watching, but he didn't return. I stayed up the rest of the night, and since that incident, I haven't had any interest in going back on the deep web. When I was about 10 years old, I went to one of my best friend's houses to hang out and then have a sleepover. I stayed over at his place all the time, and he occasionally stayed over at my place as well. His name was Robert, and we were both really into sports and played on the same football and baseball teams. Robert's dad would always throw to us football passes or pitch batting practice to us at his house, which was always fun. But on this time, he was out of town on business. Anyways, on this particular night, we played video games like we often did, until Robert's mom came upstairs to his room and told us both that it was time for bed. We both got ready for bed, and Robert went into his bed and I got in my sleeping bag on the floor. I fell asleep pretty quickly, but woke up sometime later. I groggily turned over to my other side and got comfortable again. It was pitch black, but my eyes slowly adjusted. As they did, I noticed a man in the hallway just outside of Robert's room. I assumed it was Robert's dad, and then I just closed my eyes and went back to sleep. The next morning, Robert and I got up and had some cereal. He mentioned that his dad was coming back home today, and that's when I suddenly remembered about the man I had seen in the hallway last night. It hit me that it couldn't have been Robert's dad, as he was out of town. I thought maybe I was dreaming the whole experience, but I really just knew that I wasn't. I told Robert about it, and he seemed really surprised. We told his mom about it too, and after a conversation with me and Robert, we decided to look around the house. I don't know if he fully believed me. We went around the house and started seeing if any windows or doors were open. We eventually got to the basement and the spare bedroom that they had. When we looked inside, we saw it was a complete mess. Robert was shocked and said they hadn't left it like this and it had been cleaned the last time he saw it. He also said that they didn't really go in that bedroom much and the door was usually shut. We suddenly both got the creeps and ran back upstairs and told his mom. She went down and then returned back upstairs a short time later, saying she was calling the police. A while later, the police showed up and searched the house. They didn't find the man, but a window in the guest bedroom to the basement was left open. I don't know if the man was already gone or if he left when he heard us talking about it, but it appeared he had been living in the guest room for several days. A few weeks ago, I helped my friend John move one weekend from an apartment to a small house on the other side of town. It was a pretty tough job and it was just the two of us, so it took us a while. By the time we were almost done, it was pretty late at night and we were both exhausted. John had a spare bed that we had moved into the basement. He told me I could sleep there for the night and then we could finish up in the morning. I took him up on his offer because I really didn't want to drive the 10 minutes back to my place as tired as I was. Plus, we still had a few things left to move. It was a pretty comfortable bed he had down there, and it felt great to lay down and close my eyes. I was starting to drift off when I noticed some noises. It sounded like something moving around down there, but I couldn't tell where the sounds were coming from exactly. I looked all around the basement and didn't see anything at all. It was sort of creepy, but I tried my best to just ignore it. The noises continued though, and I thought maybe it was mice or something, which was pretty gross, but as tired as I was, I eventually fell asleep. The next morning, after I woke up and went upstairs, John asked me how I slept down in the basement. I told him it was good, but I mentioned the noises I had heard. He then told me that he too had heard noises as well coming from what sounded like the basement, but figured it had to be me making the noises. He said he also heard noises in another area of the house as well. I think we both got a little creeped out by this, but we figured it had to be a mouse, and went on with the job of moving the rest of his stuff. I was moving a few of the last boxes to the basement, and I guess I was carrying too many and dropped one of the boxes on the floor. When I went to pick it up, I noticed something. In the corner of the basement, sort of under the stairs, there was a little handle sticking out of the floor. It was hard to see, and something that you wouldn't pick up unless you looked really close because of how hidden it was. I told John to come over and take a look. He looked closely and then pulled on the handle, and it lifted up a sort of trap door leading to a hidden room in the house. The room was very small, but there was a sleeping bag in it, as well as a few water bottles that were empty. It appeared someone had been living in there, but nobody was there at the moment. Me and John put two and two together from the noises we had heard, and were pretty creeped out. We searched the house, but found no one. After that, we reported the room and how someone had been living in it. Whoever had been living there never did return. They must have left for good after realizing we were there. Years ago, when I was 12 years old, there was a kid at my school named David who invited me over one day for a sleepover. It was kind of random and I was sort of surprised by it, because I didn't really know David all that well. We had talked a few times here and there, and he had been new to the school the year before, but we never really hung out at all. I told him I didn't know, but he persuaded me, so I said all right and I asked my mom when I got home from school. She said yes and drove me to his house after school that Friday. It was my first time being at David's house, and I was still kind of surprised that he invited me over, but I thought it was cool to be making a new friend. He showed me around his house, which was very nice, and we played some video games. David overall just seemed a little bit strange to me. I didn't really know what exactly it was, but I felt like I just didn't really get along with him. We had sort of different interests and things like that, and he just didn't really seem like the kind of guy I would hang out with. Finally, it was time for bed, and I got in my sleeping bag on the floor of David's room, which was a pretty decent-sized bedroom for a kid. It took me a while to fall asleep, but eventually I did, only to be woken up a few hours later. I woke up super sweaty and realized that my sleeping bag was completely zipped up and another blanket was covering my head. I took them off and immediately felt a nice feeling of cooler air. I looked around knowing I for sure didn't put that extra blanket on myself. I thought maybe David did, but why would David do something like that? I looked over and saw David was awake. I asked him why he put a blanket on my head, but he denied it. I knew he was lying, but when I accused him again, he got pretty angry at me. I decided to just try to go back to bed and make it through the rest of the night, and I could go back home in the morning. I was finally able to get back to sleep, and when I woke up, it was morning. When I did, I looked around, but David wasn't in the bedroom. I figured he must have gone to the bathroom or something, so I waited there for a few minutes. Eventually, I really had to pee, so I got up to leave the room, but the door wouldn't open. It seemed to be locked from the outside. This was the last straw for me. I was pretty annoyed with how David was acting towards me, and I called my mom on my phone and asked her to come pick me up. I didn't have a good time at all, but I was still glad, I guess, that I gave it a chance to make another friend. David, by this point, just seemed really strange to me. My mom told me she would come and get me, so I knocked on David's door and called out to him that it was locked, but nobody came. I knocked several more times and even shouted once. I told him I was locked in his room, but I got no response once again. David's house was pretty big, so there's a chance I wasn't heard, but the whole thing just made me really angry. Finally, David's mom opened the door to his bedroom and told me that my mom was here to pick me up. The way she said it, she sounded almost annoyed. And that was another thing that was sort of strange to me, is that David's parents were kind of unfriendly. I was just happy to go home, though, and I left without even seeing David at all. It was a Saturday, so I spent the rest of the day just hanging around the house and playing some video games. That night, however, I was in my bedroom when my mom called out to me that one of my friends was there. I walked out and saw David standing at the front door. He did not look happy. I walked over to him and he angrily asked me why I left his house so early without even saying bye to him or anything. I told him he locked me in his bedroom and I didn't even know where he was. He then denied it and responded by calling me a horrible friend and storming off. I really didn't care though. I just went back inside and started playing video games again. But about 15 minutes later, I suddenly heard the sound of glass breaking coming from my window. It scared me badly and I just about had a heart attack. I looked over to my window and saw glass everywhere. Then I saw a rock tumble to the ground. My parents came running into my room and saw the glass. I was all right and I wasn't near the window. My parents ran over and looked out the window to see David running away down the street. David had thrown a rock through my bedroom window, breaking it. My parents called his parents, and I remember hearing them argue for a little bit before finally hanging up. I don't really know what happened to David after that, but I never saw him at school again. About 5 years ago, I had a wedding that I was invited to that was about a 17-hour drive away. I wanted to save some money, so I decided to drive there instead of flying. At first, my goal was to drive there all in one day, but as I got down there about 14 hours in, I became so sleepy that I couldn't keep going. I knew it would be dangerous for me to try to push through, so I stopped at the next sign I saw for a rest stop. I had no idea where I really was, but it seemed like a very quiet area. When I pulled into the rest stop, I was the only one there. It was dimly lit and had one small building with a bathroom, a few vending machines, and some information flyers. When I stopped, I looked at my phone quickly for hotels, but there weren't really any in the immediate area. The closest one was a 20-minute drive away, and I was so tired I could barely keep my eyes open to look at my phone, so I knew I wouldn't make it. I went inside the rest stop and used the bathroom, and then got back in my car and put the seats back. As soon as I did, I immediately fell asleep. I normally wouldn't like sleeping in my car, and and I would think it was too uncomfortable, but that's just how tired I was at the time. I was fast asleep until I woke up to something in the middle of the night. I was half asleep, but I thought I heard something. Then I heard it again. It was the sound of somebody trying to open my driver's side door. I moved my chair from laying back to an upright position and looked out the window. I didn't see anything other than the empty parking lot. I had to admit, though, I was a little freaked out. I thought maybe I was imagining things. I sat there for a while longer, but didn't seem to see or hear anybody. So then I laid back down and tried to fall asleep again. But after a few minutes, I just had a creepy feeling and couldn't really sleep at all. I looked at my phone and saw that it was 5 o'clock in the morning. I decided I would go into the rest stop and get something to drink. Then I would just finish off the drive. I got out of my car and walked inside. They had a coffee vending machine in there, so I got some and then went back to my car. But as I stepped out of the rest stop and saw my car, I could barely see what appeared to be someone hiding underneath the bottom of it. It was dark, but I saw an arm move from behind my tire underneath my car. I went all the way back into the bathroom and locked myself in one of the stalls. There was no other cars in the parking lot, and nobody was inside the rest stop either, which made it all the more creepy. I hoped to wait there for a little while and maybe the person would leave. But the more I sat there and thought about it, the more scared I got. Then I heard the door to the rest stop open and somebody walk in. My heart sank. I picked up my feet off the floor in the bathroom in case whoever it was came inside. I heard them walk around for a bit before getting closer and finally entering the bathroom. As they did, I felt as scared as I ever have been in my life. I quietly grabbed the door to the bathroom stall from the inside. I held it tight as the person walked a little ways into the bathroom and passed my stall to the other ones. Then I heard them start to get on the floor. I figured they were going to look underneath all the stalls to see which one I was in. I decided I needed to make a run for it right then and there. I opened the door as fast as I could and ran out. As soon as I did, I heard them start to get up and chase after me. I made it out of the building and began running for my car. When I was running, I heard the sound of a man screaming in a way that sounded completely insane. I ran back to my car and swung the door open as fast as I could. Then I got inside and locked it. I started the engine and sped away as I saw the man running for me. He looked angry and possibly dangerous. I was able to get away, but that was probably the scariest moment of my life. Last summer, I was driving on a road trip from one side of the country to the other. I was relying on the maps that were built into my phone to take me to my destinations. Usually they worked out great, but on the third day of my trip, very late at night, I was trying to get to my next hotel. I was really out there in the middle of nowhere, and at this point, had mainly just been seeing woods and fields of grass. I also had been having some trouble with the maps on my phone. The signal kept going in and out, and sometimes the destinations would disappear and reappear. At one point, they stopped working completely. Anyways, I had been off the freeway and was driving on a quieter road. I don't know why looking back, but I was still trusting my maps. They told me to turn onto a dirt road that looked like it was going right smack into the middle of the woods. That was the first time I seriously started questioning my maps. That was the first time I seriously started questioning things. I knew sometimes they made mistakes and had errors, but this seemed a little bit crazy. There had to be a better road to drive on than this to get to my destination. As I drove down this road, I started to lose my signal. I tried typing the destination out again to see other routes, but nothing would happen, so I kept driving. There were absolutely no other cars on this road at all, and it was very dark other than the lights from my headlights. I kept going through and figured I would be off the road before long. I would say about 10 minutes into that, I saw the trees moving on the right side of the road as if an animal was in there. I thought maybe a deer was going to run across the road, so I started to slow down. Then I saw a creature jump out from the woods and run alongside of it for a short time before darting back into it. But this creature was like nothing I had ever seen before. It had to be about 20 feet tall and almost as skinny as a stick. It had long, skinny limbs, almost like hair. I literally jumped back in my seat as I saw it and swerved to the other side of the road. When the creature darted back into the woods, it pressed back many tree branches and caused it to look like there had been a strong wind blowing on them. I immediately sped up my car. I was terrified, and I couldn't believe what I had just seen. I wanted to get out of there as quickly as I could. But as I drove my car, it started to sputter as if it was going to die. I had almost a full tank of gas, so I knew that wasn't the problem. The lights in the car started to get dim as well. And this was strange because I had never had problems with it before, and it was fairly new. I saw the ending of the road coming up and a paved road nearby. My car slowed down more and more as I got to it, but finally I was off the dirt road and onto a real one. As soon as my car got back onto the normal road again, it started running just fine. I drove for a bit and the car was completely normal again. Then the signal came back on my phone. I took a couple of more turns and made it back to a freeway. I was able to drive the rest of the trip with no problems. But looking back on that night, I know what I saw, but I have no idea how to explain it. Back when I was in college, I went to a school that was a really long ways from home. Every semester, I would make the long road trip halfway across the country to go to school and get back home. One semester, I was traveling home for the summer. I would often have some pretty late nights on my drives. I would either stop at a hotel or just sleep in my car. On this particular time, it was the second night of my trip and probably around midnight when the gas light on my car went on. I knew I would run out soon, so I stopped at the next exit to look for gas. However, there were no gas stations immediately off the freeway, so I pulled over to the side of the quiet road that I was on and searched gas on my phone. There was a place like 5 miles down the road I was on, so I decided to go there rather than the next place, which was 10 miles down the freeway. I drove down the road and only saw a couple of other cars. Finally, I arrived at the gas station, which was very quiet and a really old-looking place. I got out and filled my tank. And I got back in my car and started to head back towards the freeway. But as I was leaving the parking lot to the gas station, a car came in at a really high speed and almost ran into me. It had to come just about a foot away. It was a really close call. I didn't know why the person was driving so reckless, but I just shook my head and kept driving. Then I noticed in my mirror the car violently turn around in the gas station parking lot and come back around to the road that I was on. The car started to follow me. I drove back maintaining the speed limit, and the car quickly was right on my tail. I wondered what this guy's problem was. I pulled to the side of the road to let him by, but he stayed on me. He followed me all the way back to the freeway. We both got onto the freeway, and he remained behind me for almost 10 minutes. I was getting really creeped out and wasn't sure what to do, but just then, finally, the car suddenly pulled out from behind me and went to pass me on the right side of the road. As it got lined up with me, I looked to see who was driving, but I saw nobody in the car at all. It was completely empty. My jaw dropped when I saw this. The car then sped past me, and I immediately looked at the license plate, but the car didn't have any license plates on at all. I was completely freaked out. I slowed down to let the car get out of my sight. Ever since this has happened, people don't believe me when I tell them the story, and I can't blame them. I probably wouldn't believe it either. Maybe there was some kind of explanation for this, but I know that nobody was in that driver's seat at all. This story took place when I was 15 years old. It was a very stormy night and about 11 p.m. It was during the summer, so I didn't have any school the next day. I was playing video games in my bedroom, which was on the upstairs of our house, and my parents and older sister had already gone to bed. I took a break to go to the bathroom, and when I came back to my room, I looked out the window for a little while to admire the storm. There was pouring rain with lightning and some thunder as well. Then I noticed a car driving very slowly down our street. It slowed down even more in front of our house, and then pulled to the side of the road and stopped. We lived in a pretty typical neighborhood with many houses, but our street wasn't all that busy. I was a little surprised to see this car stop where it did. I kept my eyes locked on it, waiting to see who would get out and where they would go. I watched for a good couple minutes, but nobody was getting out. It just seemed a little suspicious to me. I decided to go back to playing video games, but I kept an eye out on the car. Just as I got back to my game, though, I noticed the car door start to open. I went back over to my window and looked out of it. I saw a man start to lean out of the car as if he was going to get out. I didn't get a real good look at him, but he seemed to be pretty average with blondish hair, maybe in his 30s. He looked around and then looked right at me. We made eye contact for a brief moment, and it gave me the creeps. Then he went back inside of his car. I jumped back and hid behind my gaming chair, but I peeked around it to see what he would do. I saw the car drive away. He drove just as slowly as he was before, and I noticed him turn at the end of our street. Maybe I was feeling paranoid, but I decided to go up to our little attic area that we had in our house. It was used as an office area mostly for my dad, but it had a good view of around the neighborhood because of how high up it was. I went up there and looked out of a window facing the opposite direction. I ducked down as I watched the car. I could see it just barely through some trees going down the road and then turning on the street behind my house. We had neighbors whose backyards backed up to ours, and the car drove to the house directly behind ours and then stopped on the side of the road once again. I didn't take my eyes off of it, and after about 2 or 3 minutes, the door opened and the man got out completely this time. He walked towards the house behind ours, and then I lost sight of him because of some trees blocking my vision. I kept looking out at my backyard though, and after about a minute, I saw the man emerge from behind our fence as he appeared to jump over it and into our backyard. Then he started walking towards our house. At this point, I sprinted out of the attic and back down towards my parents' bedroom. I went in and woke them up, saying there was a man in our yard. My parents seemed a little confused at first, but then they became concerned. My dad got up and started to go downstairs. As he did, we heard the noise of a scraping against our back window in the kitchen. My dad turned on all the lights as he went down, and I heard my mother yell from upstairs she was going to call the police. We then heard a noise, and as we got to the first floor of the house, we saw just for a second through the window the man running away. I went upstairs and watched his car start, and then him drive away seconds later. The police ended up arriving sometime after that, and it ended up being a late night. There were some scratch marks against our window as if the man was trying to break it. The police told us they would have extra patrol in our area, which made me feel slightly better, but I was still concerned knowing the man had gotten away. It's been about 5 years since that happened, and every time I think about the man when he made eye contact with me, it gives me the creeps. I used to work at an AT&T store in one of those sort of strip malls. My job was relatively easy for me, and it was something I enjoyed doing for the time being. We didn't get a whole lot of business, so many days I would work alone. On one day it was stormy, and we didn't get anybody in the store for the last hour. It got real bad outside. The rain was pouring and the wind was blowing it all around. Everything in the area got absolutely soaked. Finally, it was time to leave work, and I closed the store up and locked it. I got my umbrella and got ready to run to my car. Once I did, though, I realized there was a man just sitting on the curb of the parking lot in the rain. I saw that he had a subway uniform on, and as I got closer, I saw his name tag said Jack. So I figured he worked at the subway. I felt bad for him sitting there, and I figured his car must have broke down or something. Pretty much the whole strip mall was closed, and the parking lot was empty, so I decided to ask him if he needed help with anything. He told me he had got off work, but his ride couldn't make it. He said he was planning to wait for it to stop raining and then walk home, which was about 3 miles away. I figured because we worked in the same little area that it wouldn't hurt to give him a ride, and it wasn't very far. So even though it was something that I normally would not do, I told him to hop in the back of my car and I'd give him a ride home. He appeared to be a nice guy, sort of short with long brown hair, and was maybe 20 years old if I had to guess. I asked him where he needed me to take him, and he once again repeated it was just about 3 miles down the road, and then he thanked me. I began driving down the road, and after about a mile, he told me to take the next right. I took the exit, and after that, he told me to take another turn shortly after that. After going down that road for a little while, I started to get a kind of bad feeling. I knew the area pretty well, and he was directing me to kind of nowhere. There wasn't really any houses in this area or businesses. I asked him where exactly it was. Then he changed his personality and snapped a little bit at me, saying that it wasn't very far and I should relax. It was far off from the way he'd been thanking me minutes earlier. I drove some more down the road, and we were going farther and farther from the residential areas. He then instructed me to take a turn, which led to a quiet road with thick woods on both sides. I just had a bad feeling about the situation, so I decided I needed to let him out. There was a small little gas station on the right just before the turn, and I pulled into it. I told the man that I was sorry, but I just couldn't take him any further. He looked at me for a few seconds, and then just left my car and walked out into the rain again. I felt sort of bad, but I had to listen to my instincts and let him out of my car. As I pulled out of the parking lot, I noticed a car pull in at the same time. The car stopped, and the Jack guy I had been giving a ride to immediately hopped in the car as if he knew the driver. They drove away immediately. I was really surprised to see it, and it made him seem even more sketchy. The next day that I worked, when I had a break, I walked over to the subway out of curiosity. I went inside and asked them about Jack, and they told me that nobody worked there named Jack. I described a little more about him, and they told me they had never seen him. It gave me the creeps and made me realize how good of a decision I most likely made when I kicked him out of my car. This story took place just about a month ago. There was a strong thunderstorm that hit my hometown. I have a dog named Buddy, who is a beagle and always has been scared of thunderstorms. He typically starts whining and sometimes shaking as well and follows me everywhere during the storms. On this night, as it got worse, he got really scared and I petted him to help him relax. But when the storm quieted down just a little bit, he all of a sudden jumped off my lap and ran over to the back door of our house. He began barking like crazy. I figured he was scared from the storm, so I tried to get him back and calm him down, but he just kept barking and running around. I decided to put him up in my bedroom where it would be a bit quieter, but before I did, I noticed him wanting to go out the back door, so I went over to it and opened it slowly. But as soon as I opened the door, I saw a creepy-looking lady who was soaking wet standing there. She was about 5 feet from the door, and when I opened it, she started charging at me. I picked up Buddy, then I slammed the door shut literally just in time as she banged into it. I locked the door quickly, then saw the woman run over to my window and stick her face up to the glass. She was smiling in a really creepy-looking smile. Then she started screaming repeatedly. Buddy continued to bark like crazy, and I took out my phone and called the police. I then went up to my bedroom with Buddy and locked the door and waited for them to arrive. The whole time I was in the room, I could hear the woman screaming and occasionally pounding on the window. It took just over 5 minutes for the police to arrive, and when they did, they were able to take the woman away. Turns out she was on some sort of drugs, but it made for a very creepy night. This is a story that was told to me by my aunt that gave me the chills. Back in the 90s when she was in college, she worked at Burger King for one summer. She told me that one night, when she was at work, it was a really quiet night and it was pretty late, so it was just her and a few other employees working at the time. My aunt needed to go back to a storage closet they had to get something, but when she opened the door, she saw a man sitting inside the closet. She screamed and ran away to get another worker. When they both came back to the closet and opened it, the man was gone. They had no idea how he could have gotten out without being seen. Then, a few weeks later, while working another late-night shift, my aunt was by herself working the cash register. The restaurant was completely empty, except for a man sitting by himself in the corner. After a few minutes and getting several looks at him, my aunt recognized him to be the same man that was hiding in the closet from before. She wasn't sure what to do. The man was just sitting there in the corner by himself. He didn't order anything, and he wasn't really doing anything either. He was just sitting there. She couldn't help but feel a little bit nervous. My aunt ended up going back to tell one of her coworkers who she was friends with. But when they both came back, once again, the man was gone. It was a weird experience, and my aunt only worked at the Burger King for that one summer. Not long after, she quit working there, but she learned about the history of that Burger King from her friend later on. It used to be a different restaurant, but that restaurant was closed after a man had died inside the restaurant in a robbery. When she saw the man's photo, he looked exactly like the one she had seen. The restaurant was abandoned for about a year before Burger King took it over 5 years before my aunt worked there. It's a pretty creepy story. This happened almost 3 years ago now. I was driving back with my friend from college. It was kind of late at night and we were both super hungry. We saw an exit and took it. When we did, we saw that the only open restaurant there was Arby's. Their drive-thru was out of order, so we both walked inside. The place was very quiet and we appeared to be the only customers. We ordered and then stood by waiting for our food. As we were waiting, we saw the door open and a man walk in. He looked to be middle-aged and was rather tall and large. He had glasses and sort of long hair as well. He walked in slowly and looked at us as he did. Then he walked over and sat down at one of the tables in the restaurant. As we waited, I could feel the eyes of the man locking onto us. My friend and I would both glance over occasionally to see him staring. It was rather uncomfortable. Finally, our food was done, and they gave it to us. We took it and walked out of the restaurant. As we walked out and went back to my car, I noticed the man was parked directly next to us. At least, I assumed that it was the man's car, because there were only 2 other cars in the entire parking lot. Then, I noticed the man exiting the restaurant and walking towards us. He was giving off a really creepy feeling to my friend and I, so we quickly got in my car. We had planned to eat in the parking lot and then drive back, but with the man parked next to us, he got in his car and then began to stare at us once again through the windows of our cars. It was really creepy, so I decided to just drive away. But just as I was afraid of, as soon as I started up my engine, the man started up his as well. And when I started driving away, he followed. I merged back onto the freeway that we had been on before. It was pretty late, so not too many cars were out there besides us. As we started to speed up through the freeway, the guy in the car behind us went from following us to aggressively tailing us. He drove right up to the bumper of my car and followed extremely close. He was so close that I thought he was going to hit the back of my car. I sped up, but at the same time, I knew the potential danger we were in. My heart started to race and I began sweating. The guy behind us then changed lanes and started driving beside us. I slowed down to let him pass. When I did, he slowed down to the same speed. But as his car got next to mine, I looked over and saw him staring at me with a deranged smile on his face. Then he turned his car right towards ours. I had to swerve onto the shoulder of the freeway and slam on my brakes to avoid him hitting me. He ended up swerving too far and then spinning his car out. As it did, he went off the road and his car went down into the ditch. We slowly drove by as we saw him try to drive out of the ditch, but appeared to get stuck. I was relieved, and I didn't want to stay there, so I elected to drive away, but as I did, my friend called the police. We explained the situation, and they said they would have people in the area shortly. I was able to make it home safely, thankfully, but it was a close call and something I will never forget. I used to work pretty late nights at one of the jobs I had a few years ago. I remember one night after work, I was especially hungry and wanted to get some food on the way home. It was after midnight though, so I knew I didn't have many options. Of course, as I was driving down the road, I saw a Taco Bell sign, and I knew they were usually open late, so I decided to stop there. I was not all that familiar with the area, because I only lived in that city for the job I had, and I was from another state entirely. As I pulled into the Taco Bell parking lot, I could see that it seemed a little outdated and run down. There was also nobody else there, but that wasn't all too strange with it being so late. The area did look pretty run down, and it was a little sketchy, but I didn't care. I was just really hungry. I pulled into the drive-thru. It took a while for the person to ask me what I wanted, but when they finally did, I ordered 2 beef burritos. I pulled around to the next window and paid. The worker said the food would be out shortly, and then walked away from the window. Once they walked away, it took a really long time for them to come back. I sat there waiting for about 5 minutes. I wondered why it would be taking so long because nobody else was here, and I had ordered one of the most common things on the menu. Still, I wasn't going to complain as long as I got my food. But then, out of nowhere, I felt the back passenger side door to my car try to be opened. I was driving an SUV, but thankfully my back doors were locked. I looked but couldn't see anybody. They must have quickly hid behind my car at an angle I couldn't see. Then I heard someone kick the back of my car. As they kicked it, I looked again and saw somebody duck down behind the back of my car. Then I started to see a man running out of a bush on the edge of the parking lot of the Taco Bell. He was running straight for my car and appeared to be wearing a ski mask covering his whole head. I didn't waste a moment and quickly hit the gas pedal and sped away. I could see him and another man running after me in my rearview mirror as I sped off. I left the area quickly and ended up driving home without getting any food. I reported the incident, but I never stopped at that Taco Bell again. Bloody idiot, Alex raged at Fraser. I asked you if you had a spare tire, and you said yes. I didn't hear you, Fraser argued. You did because you answered, Alex yelled. Fighting isn't going to solve anything, I interjected, trying to keep some semblance of peace before war erupted. Guys, I'm cold, Paris moaned. That's the least of our problems, Alex snapped. We were in a jam, but I thought Alex was overreacting. The situation wasn't unsolvable. We got a puncture on our way to Fraser's uncle's woodland cabin. We couldn't call roadside assistance because there was no signal out here. That's actually why we chose the cabin over a city break. As YouTubers, having no access to our phones or the internet for a week was appealing. Paris made beauty videos, Alex had a commentary channel, and Fraser and myself were horror narrators. As much as we loved our jobs and felt lucky to be able to make YouTube videos for a living, the nasty comments and overbearing fans got us down sometimes. We figured having a break from all that and being unable to check our social media and comment sections even if we wanted to would do us a world of good. Look, I said, I'll walk back to the town that we passed. It must have been, 6 miles back? I might get some signal somewhere along the way, or another car might come along with a spare tire. You live in a fairyland, mate, Alex said. Do you have a better idea? I asked. You guys wait here. Wait, it's not safe to go alone, Paris said. She cut a final slice off her apple, then threw the core into the woods beside the road. "Are you offering?" I asked, looking at her high heels. "I'll go," Fraser sighed. "I'd rather walk in the dark than have Mr. High and Mighty going on at me." Alex flipped him the bird as we set off. I used my phone as a light. The moonlight glistened on the rain-soaked road. The torrential downpour had stopped a few minutes before we got the puncture, but I had my waterproof on in case. My sister said she replaced the spare tire. How was I supposed to know she hadn't? Alex is such a big douche, he doesn't fit in the bag anymore, Fraser vented. "It's okay, don't take it personally. I'm sure Alex is just tired and frustrated," I replied. Fraser continued ranting. I knew we shouldn't have invited him on this trip. He changed after he got his 100K plaque. He's probably hitting on Paris right now. It's very convenient, isn't it? It wouldn't surprise me if he removed the spare tire to get you and me out of the way. "You wanted to come," I pointed out. I would have made faster progress walking to town on my own, but I kept this thought to myself. We walked 2 miles in companionable silence before Fraser said he needed to pee. "Give me 2 minutes," he said, walking into the woods. 2 minutes passed, then 5, then another 5, and he didn't return. "Fraser," I called out. I headed into the woods. "I'm coming in, pull your pants up," I yelled. I couldn't find Fraser anywhere nearby. I went back to the road in case we missed each other, but he wasn't there either. "Fraser," I called again. "This isn't funny." I waited another 10 minutes before searching the woods again. I was wondering whether to continue to town or go back and tell the others that Fraser was missing when I saw headlights. I ran back to the road, almost falling over a tree root on the way. I waved the car down and it pulled over. I jogged over to the driver's window. A young couple was in the car. "What are you doing out here?" the man asked. "We got a flat a few miles back. We were walking to town, but my friend went to pee and hasn't come back." The couple exchanged a knowing and concerned glance. "Get in," the man said. "I'll drop you in town. We'll go to the next town instead of back to the last. We live there and my brother's a mechanic. He can fix your car, but it won't be till the morning, 'cause no one comes out here at night. It's not safe." "What about my friend? Why isn't it safe?" "There have been animal attacks," the woman said. This made no sense. No large predators were known to inhabit the area according to my guidebooks and internet research. I considered my options. I read scary stories for a living. I knew better than to get in a car with strangers. But if there was an animal, Alex and Paris needed to be warned. What if one of them went into the woods to relieve themselves? The couple seemed nice enough, although I'm sure that thought passed through the minds of many victims before they trusted a serial killer. "Come on, it's really not safe," the woman pleaded. She seemed genuinely frightened. This helped me make my decision. I got in the back seat. We weren't that far from Alex and Paris. The couple didn't know I had other friends back at the car. I thought that if they planned to kidnap me, I could get my friends' attention when they failed to stop our car, or I could jump out and my friends being there would stop the couple pursuing me. "I'm Jed, this is Amanda," the man said. "Mitchell," I replied. "My friends call me Mitch." "If it's so unsafe, why are you out here?" Amanda replied, "Driving through isn't so bad, but you should never stop." "What type of animal is it?" "No one knows. The bodies are always too torn up to tell." Jed pulled over beside our car. I jumped out. "Alex? Paris?" I called. Nobody responded. I was hit with a wave of terror. This was eerily similar to Fraser's disappearance. I hurried to the car. The passenger door was wide open. Nobody was inside, but the seat was drenched with what looked like blood, and there was the unmistakable metallic smell of the red stuff. The road was blood-soaked as well. I hadn't noticed at first, mistaking it for rainwater. Silent tears streamed down my face. "Oh no," Amanda whispered beside me. "We need to get to town," Jed insisted. "A search party will look for your friend tomorrow." "I thought you said he was with you back there." "There were 2 more waiting here," I replied distractedly. "I was looking for the knife Paris used to cut her apple, and I couldn't find it anywhere." "Typical," I muttered, hoping we wouldn't need it if we drove straight to town. Then movement caught my eye. "Wait, I think I saw someone," I called to Jed and Amanda, who were walking back to their car. "Was that the animal?" Amanda asked in panic. "No, it was a person." "Alex, is that you, mate?" The figure came out from behind a tree. He was muscular and well-built, but too tall to be Alex. Then the figure stepped closer, and I noticed his legs weren't right. They bent the wrong way at the knee, like a dog's. Then the head moved to the side, and I saw a snout pointing at the sky. The jaws opened and released a howl. "Run!" Jed yelled. The wolfman dropped onto all fours and raced towards me at an impossibly fast speed. If I hadn't been so close to Jed's car, I wouldn't have made it. "Drive!" Amanda screeched. Jed turned the key in the ignition. The engine roared to life, but the car was thrown off the ground before we could get away. I think we flipped a few times in the air. I hadn't had any time to get my seatbelt on, so I was thrown about like snow in a snow globe. The car landed upside down on the tarmac with a crash. Broken glass punctured my skin all over my body. I touched my aching head and my fingers came away bloody, but I was awake. I could move all my limbs. Jed was hanging upside down in the driver's seat, his seatbelt digging into his flesh. Amanda hadn't been wearing a belt. She was still in her seat, but her neck lay against the roof in the car at a right angle, with a bone protruding through her skin. I rolled onto my side and coughed. Jed grunted. "Jed," I said urgently. His eyes flickered open. He saw Amanda. His noises of grief sounded inhuman, and all too human at the same time. Wolf feet appeared a few meters from my head. I hurriedly released one of my shoelaces from its sneaker. "Jed, listen, the wolf is here. When it attacks, I need you to keep as still as you can. Stop it using its arms against me." "Babe, no," he cried, still looking at Amanda. I don't think he heard me. He screamed as the wolf tore him from the car. I knew my plan was unlikely to work now. It would have been a long shot, even with Jed's help, but I was going to go down fighting. The wolf pulled me from the car by my ankles. More broken glass scraped my back. Grateful for all the time I spent in the gym doing sit-ups, I launched myself forward and wrapped the shoelace tight around the wolf's neck. I pulled with all my strength. I was sure the wolf would strike me with its claws, but I was determined to hold on. It would kill me before I let go. The wolfman simply swiped its head sideways aggressively, and the lace snapped. It looked down at me as if I was an idiot to think that would work. I was surprised an animal could express so much through its face and eyes. It seemed unbelievably human in that moment. It growled, no doubt preparing to end my life. I closed my eyes, praying it would be quick. My eyes opened when the wolf yowled in pain. Blood cascaded from its neck. The wolf took dying swipes at me. I protected my face with my arms, and my arms with my legs and soles of my feet. I managed to avoid getting more than a few minor scratches before the beast collapsed beside me on the road. My savior offered me a hand up. It took me a moment to recognize Paris because she was covered in dirt and leaves. She held the apple knife in trembling hands. We hugged, both of us crying. We collapsed to the side of the road, physically and mentally exhausted. I got us food and water from the car. We needed fuel for the long hike to town. "Alex?" I asked. "It got him," she replied. I nodded, expecting as much, having seen the blood in the car. "I hid while it was ripping him up," she continued. "It tore his throat out straight away. I couldn't have helped. I rolled in mud so it couldn't smell me. It tried to find me, but went the wrong way." We turned when we heard a weird sound beside us. I can only liken it to crackling paper or spitting fire. Something was happening to the wolf. We watched in horror as it returned to human form. Fraser lay on the tarmac with his throat sliced open where the wolf had been. I couldn't believe it. He was our friend, and he brought us out here to die. People say YouTube friends are fake, but this took it to a whole new level. We began the slow walk into town. Paris had removed her heels, but I was hobbling, having hurt my ankle in the car flip. "Was he a werewolf?" I asked. Paris said, "I don't think so. It's not a full moon. Maybe he was a dog man. They're different from werewolves, according to my brother. He's into this stuff. Surely people sent you dogman stories for your channel." I ignored those. "I only read true stories," I told her. She laughed and said, "Maybe give them the benefit of the doubt next time." In 2019, a homeowner was looking at security footage from her home driveway and saw something strange. She posted the video to social media, and it soon went viral. The video shows a short figure with wobbly legs walking down her driveway. The owner was confused as to what it was that was walking in her driveway. Many people on the internet have had different theories of what it could be. However, there's been no confirmation as to whether it was just a joke or what exactly it was. Nobody really knows what was seen on the surveillance video. This is security camera footage from a man who lives up in the mountains. The footage shows a woman who appears to be wandering around the property. Nobody knows who the woman is, though, or where she's come from. It seems as if she may be looking for something, but it's unknown what. What makes it so creepy is that the house she's wandering near is not located by any busy roads, and there are no immediate neighbors. In 2014, Lars Matank traveled with a group of his friends from Germany to Varna, Bulgaria. While they were in Bulgaria, Matank was at a bar with his friends when he got into a disagreement with some other people over football. After the altercation, he then left the bar and was gone for the rest of the night. The next day, Matank arrived back at the resort where he and his friends were staying and told them he had been beaten up by men hired by the group at the bar he had gotten into an argument with. Matank had an injured jaw as well as eardrum. After seeing a doctor, he was advised not to fly due to his injuries. Matank told his friends to go ahead and fly back home with their original plan, and he would fly back later on his own. After his friends left, he checked into the Hotel Color Varna. However, when he arrived at the hotel, he began to act different. Matank called his mother, telling her 4 men were after him and to cancel his credit cards. The day Matank was supposed to fly home, he was at the Varna airport to see a doctor, but while they were there, he got up and began to run away. He's seen running from the airport on surveillance video and has not been seen since. This video takes place in the city of Salinas, California, in January of 2019. The surveillance video that was captured by a Ring security camera shows a man approach the front door of a house at about 5 o'clock in the morning. The homeowners were not inside the house at the time, but got a notification on their phone of activity at their front door. What was shown on the video is a man repeatedly licking the doorbell to the front door of the house. The man ended up licking the doorbell for more than 3 hours. He was later seen at several other properties in the neighborhood. The man was able to be identified based on the video and ended up being caught. This video was recorded by a Ring doorbell camera. The video shows a clown slowly emerging from the front yard and walking towards the door. The clown is holding balloons in his hand and stays on the front doorstep before turning and walking away. It's unknown who the clown is or why it went to the house. There have been many sightings on security cameras such as this in neighborhoods across the country over the past few years of clowns lurking around neighborhoods. I recently got my first car and moved outside of the city. For years, I had rode my bike just about everywhere, but after I got my car, I really stopped using it. It was a very nice bike, so I decided to sell it on Craigslist and see what I could get for it. The bike was up for a few days before I got any responses. Finally, I got one. A man named John said he was very interested and wanted to buy it. I gave him my address and told him to come by that evening. When the time came, I got the bike and went out to my driveway. A short time later, I saw a van come around the corner towards my house. It was a kind of old-looking van, and it parked right in front of my house. A man got out and introduced himself to me. He wore a cap and his clothes were sort of dirty. He told me he was John, and then he started looking at the bike. He examined it for a couple of minutes, and then felt one of the tires. He said the tire seemed low, and asked if I could get my pump from the garage. In my opinion, the tire was just fine, and I was sort of afraid he would try to steal the bike if I walked away, so I told him I didn't have a pump. The man then asked if we could go into my garage, because it looked like it was going to rain. It was cloudy, but I didn't really think it was going to rain, and overall the man was really sketching me out. I told him no, and the man then just simply turned around and walked back to his car. I brought the bike back up my driveway. I waited for the man to leave, but he just seemed to be sitting there in his car. I went behind my house to put the bike away and then went inside. It took about 30 minutes for the van to drive away. I kept an eye on him the whole time because the man had just come across as a little suspicious to me. The situation made me a little more skeptical about Craigslist because I really hadn't used it before and I had heard lots of bad things, but I figured it was all just stories. The next day when I woke up, I walked out my front door like I did every day to water several of my plants that I had out there. When I opened the door, I noticed the van was parked in front of my house again. As soon as I seemed to notice it, it violently pulled out onto the street and drove away, making a screeching noise as it did. I was left pretty shocked. I didn't know what they were doing there or if they were planning something bad, but I'm not aware of them returning since. This was all just a few weeks ago, and I've decided to just keep the bike. A couple of years ago, I was looking to buy a used car on Craigslist. I didn't have a whole lot of money, so I knew the options that I was looking at were most likely a beater. I didn't really care though. As long as the car ran well and was reliable, I would be happy with it. I was a 22-year-old guy and in college at the time, and my previous car, which was also a beater, had finally broken down. After browsing for several days and borrowing one of my parents' cars in the meantime, I found an ad for something on Craigslist that seemed pretty good. It was a 2004 Chevy Impala, selling for a pretty cheap price, and according to the listing, it ran great. It looked slightly dirty in the picture, but I thought it was worth looking at, so I contacted the seller and asked them if I could take a look. The seller said his name was Dave, and replied that sure I could come by later at about 6. He then asked if that worked for me. I said it did, and then he sent me the address. When the time came, I put the address into my phone and drove to the location. It was roughly 30 minutes away from my house. The area looked sort of rough, and the address was at the end of a street. I saw a house with a driveway that was completely empty, and I texted Dave that I was there, but I didn't see the car. He replied to me that the car was in the back and told me to come around. This seemed a little odd, but I told myself to man up and go look at it. I got out of the car and walked into the front yard of the house. The grass was rather long and overgrown, and it had several trees with branches that had fallen over all over the place in the yard. When I got around the house to the back, I saw a man with grayish hair and a t-shirt who waved at me. I could see the car was there in the backyard up against an old shed, and after looking at it in person, it looked like it hadn't been driven in years. The man told me I was in luck because he was thinking of dropping the price. He then waved me over to the car. He told me to get in and see how it felt for me to sit inside of it, so I walked over to the car and noticed that there were blankets covering the back windows. They were draped over them from the inside, but were sticking out at the tops of the windows a little bit. I had a bad feeling, and as I got towards the driver's door, I was sure I could sense someone moving in the back seat of the car. At that point, I backed away. I could see some surprise in Dave's eyes as he looked at me. I quickly made up an excuse for backing away, and said Dave I needed to ask him how many miles were on the car again before I forgot. He looked up and paused for a second, before saying it had just over 100,000 miles. As he said this, I slowly walked farther away from both Dave and the car. Once I reached a distance I was confident in, I ran away all the way back to my car. I drove home after that. I still believe to this day that was some sort of setup. I don't know for sure, but I did end up getting a car, just not from Craigslist. Several months ago, I dropped my phone on the ground and broke it. It was broken to the point that I couldn't even use it, and the phone seemed to be damaged beyond repair. My phone was my main communication, and I used it a lot for my work, so I knew I needed a new one immediately. I decided to turn to Craigslist to see if there was any good deals. I figured it would be really fast and possibly getting one the same day. I looked around on my laptop for no longer than 5 minutes before finding something that looked promising to me. It was the same model of phone that I had before, and the price was very reasonable. It was said to be used, but in good working condition and unlocked as well. My friend loaned me their phone for the day so I could text the seller. I contacted them and asked them how soon I could buy it. It took them a little while to respond though, and they said they were at work and worked until 8 p.m., so the earliest I could come by was 9. I was somewhat disappointed, but I figured it was still faster than buying one online and a lot cheaper than getting one from a store, so I agreed. At about 8:30, I got another text, which was an address and the person saying, "Stop by now." I got in my car right away and drove to the location, which was about 15 minutes away. It was in a neighborhood that had a lot of relatively small houses that were close to each other. The street seemed pretty quiet, and I matched the address on the text to the one on the street. I parked my car on the side of the road and walked up to the front step. I waited for a response, but I wasn't getting one. Then I heard movement right inside the front door and saw that the door was being opened. I expected someone to be there and invite me in, but instead the door just opened about a foot, and then I heard someone walk away. I stood there for a second, not sure if it was an invitation to come in or what. I called out hello, but didn't get a response. I continued to stand there until I saw the door swing open even more. At that point, I decided to walk inside. As I stepped in, I heard the wooden floors creaking at my feet. The house was pretty old and mostly dark, besides a few small lamps that were on and some kitchen lights in the back. The door opened to a living room with a couch and a couple chairs, but was mostly pretty empty. Then I saw a staircase and a hallway in the middle. I took another step in and said, "I'm here to buy the phone." Again, no response. Then I noticed from behind the wall of the kitchen, out into the hallway, a man come about halfway out. He had a huge smile on his face, so big that I could see all of his teeth, and his eyes were wide open. He looked insane. He held out his hand with the phone in it, but didn't say anything. He took his other hand and slowly pointed it at me, and then waved me over, all while having the same creepy smile on his face the entire time. I felt nothing but scared, and turned and ran out of the house all the way back to my car. A while back, I got a new car and decided to sell my old one on Craigslist. I had used Craigslist many times before to buy things as well as sell, and I had had good experiences with it. It was my old Jeep that I was selling, and I figured it wouldn't be too hard to sell because it ran well and didn't really have any problems. I put up the listing at a price that was maybe a little too high though, because I didn't really get any interest in it other than a few people that were trying to lowball me. Finally, I got some interest from someone. We arranged a time for them to come and look at it. I decided to make the meeting place a local grocery store. The grocery store was by my house and had a really large parking lot that was usually always open at the back. When the time came, we both met there, and I saw a man get out of an old-looking car and come over to me. He shook my hand and said his name was George. He seemed to be a pretty average-looking guy. I told him a few things about the car, and he started to look at it. He didn't really seem all that interested in it, though. He then asked me to take it for a test drive. I told him sure, but I would go along with him. I got in the passenger side and he got in the driver's seat. He pulled out of the grocery store parking lot and drove down the road. It was a mainly residential area with some wild land as well, so the roads weren't too busy. He drove up north a little while and then suddenly turned left on a road that appeared to be dirt. I didn't know why exactly he was turning here, and at this point it seemed a little strange, so I asked the man if he knew where he was going. He didn't reply to me though. I got a little bit concerned, but the man then pulled the car over to the side of the dirt road that we were on. It was surrounded by a field to the left and a woods to the right. The man then got out and slowly walked into the woods. I called after him, but it only seemed to make him go faster. I was pretty alarmed with what I was seeing. Why was the man going into the woods? I was a little concerned, so I shut the doors and locked it. I waited there for a while and called his number on his phone, but the call was immediately declined. I was pretty creeped out, so I decided to call the police and tell them the situation. I then drove back to the grocery store parking lot, which was only a couple of minutes away. When I got there, the man's car was gone. I was really surprised by what happened, and to this day, I really don't know how to explain it. This occurred several years ago. I used to shop at Walmart's quite frequently. They really sold everything I needed and were all over the place, so it was always my first store to go to. At one point, I had to go out of town for a work conference. It lasted about a week and was about a 10-hour drive away. After it was over, I was driving back. I was on the way home about halfway, and it got pretty late at night. I was prepared to drive through the night, but my car got low on gas, so I stopped at the next exit and filled it up. I was pretty hungry, but noticed that the convenience store of the gas station was closed. This town was really small and didn't seem to have much, but they did have a Walmart that was across the street. This Walmart was one of the strangest ones I had ever seen. It just wasn't the typical kind of Walmart building that they usually are in. The building seemed smaller, and more as if it had taken over a building of a previous store that had been there. The parking lot was quiet, only a couple of cars, so I looked it up on Google Maps, and it said sure enough it was open. This seemed kind of surprising to me because it was around midnight, but I pulled my car into the parking lot and went inside. As I slowly walked in, I didn't really know what I was looking for, but I guess just some type of food. As I walked around inside, I didn't notice anybody else. The inside of the Walmart looked for the most part like a regular Walmart, but at the same time, a lot different. It was much smaller inside and arranged differently than most of the ones I had been in. Still, not a big deal though, and I tried to find something I could snack on. As I walked around, I didn't see anybody else in the store at all. It seemed a little bit odd to not even see a worker, but then again, it was midnight in a small town that I had never been in before. I had made it to the back aisle and was looking around when I heard the noise of someone walking. They entered the aisle from the far side from where I was in, and I noticed it was someone wearing one of those horse face masks that covers a person's whole head. I looked and it startled me at first, but then I chuckled. I guess it was some guy pranking people late at night. He stood there looking at me. Then he walked away. I told him it was very funny. I finally found a couple of things and picked them up. Then I headed to the front of the store. As I did, I noticed another person walking by, also wearing a horse mask. I thought maybe it had to be the guy's friend and they were both in on the joke. I once again smiled and kept walking. I used the self-checkout and paid for my things, all while not seeing a single employee. As I was almost done, I saw another 2 people emerge from behind one of the check lanes. They were both wearing horse masks as well. By that time, I got a rush of fear run through my body. I didn't know what was going on, but it didn't really seem like a joke to me anymore. I looked back and saw the other two people in horse masks staring at me from the back near the aisles. I tried to not let them see the fear that I had. I calmly got my receipt and walked away and out the doors. I walked all the way back to my car, hoping that I wouldn't hear the footsteps of anyone leaving behind me, and to my surprise, I didn't. But when I got to my car, I realized there was a new car that was parked next to mine. I tried to ignore it as best as I could, and got to my car, unlocked it, and quickly got inside. As I did, I glanced over to the car parked next to mine. At first, it looked like it was empty, but then I saw a horse mask pop up in the driver's seat. I just about had a heart attack in that moment. I slammed my foot on the gas and left that city back to the freeway and on my way home. I got home the next day and still wonder what was going on there. Last summer, I worked at a Walmart, mostly stocking shelves late at night. It was pretty easy and was really the first real job that I had. One night, I happened to be working at around 11 o'clock p.m. We were still open at that time, but we would rarely get many customers then because we closed at midnight. I was in an aisle where we sold pet supplies at the very back end of the store, just stocking a shelf. I heard somebody walking close by and then saw a man enter the aisle and start to approach me. I really didn't like when customers would ask me questions, but I would always do my best to answer them. He came closer to me, and when he did, I noticed that some of his clothes were ripped, and he seemed a little bit off. He said to me that he had a question for me. Then he began to ask something, but never really got to the question. He stopped himself and slowly said to me that he didn't like me. His face changed to an angry look. I had no idea what to do, but I figured this man had to be on some sort of drugs. He slowly walked behind the aisle we were in. I just shook my head and went back to work, but I could tell that the man was just standing there, barely around the corner. As I took products out of boxes and placed them on the shelves, I noticed out of the corner of my eye the man stick his head around the corner for a second and then go back. He still had a very angry look on his face. I did my best to ignore him and figured that he would walk away soon enough. About 5 minutes passed by, and as far as I knew, he was still there. Then out of nowhere, several items came flying off the shelf near me as if they had been pushed from the other side. Now this annoyed me. I said in a firm voice to the man that he should just get whatever he came here to get and leave. What he said in response was that he was going to get me, and then he called for me to come around the corner to the other side. I ignored it and started to pick up the items that fell. He called out a couple of more times for me to come out, but I just ignored him once again. About a minute later, I heard the sound of more people in the aisle next to mine. It sounded like 4 or 5 men were suddenly in the aisle. I decided to walk over and look, and saw several police officers start to take the man away. One of the officers walked over to me, and I asked him what happened. He told me that that man had assaulted somebody in a nearby restaurant a few blocks away in a seemingly random attack and then fled. He was found at the Walmart. It seemed like he was going for me next. I had a job a few years ago that was pretty tough. I worked some insanely long days and got home very late at night sometimes. One night I was working late, and I left work so sleepy that I could barely stay awake. I began driving home, and after about 10 minutes I knew I wouldn't make it all the way back before falling asleep. I pulled into the next exit where there was a 24-hour Walmart that I knew of. It was sometime after 2 in the morning when I got there. My goal was to just walk around a little bit to wake up, and maybe buy an energy drink or something with caffeine in it. I got inside the store and began to walk around. I only saw a few customers at the front end of the store with some employees, but other than that it seemed almost completely empty. I was walking around the back end of the store for a little bit, slowly starting to feel more awake, when I noticed someone walking behind me. They were walking behind me at an extremely close distance that was very uncomfortable. I stopped and looked behind me. There was a man that was no more than 5 feet away. He stopped as well and stared at me with a blank look on his face for a second. He was about 6 feet tall, wearing a brown suit jacket with a brown turtleneck. He then turned and walked away into a nearby aisle. I continued to walk around the store, but it wasn't long until the man was back again. This time, as soon as he got close, I turned to him and said, "Can I help you?" He once again just changed directions and walked away. I decided it would be best for me to just leave at that point. I went and got an energy drink and checked out. I was feeling more awake now, though, and also a little bit creeped out by the man. I left the store and walked back to my car. Something about the way the man was staring at me just kind of gave me the creeps. Luckily for me, I was way more awake now, and I was able to drive home without any problems. If that were the full story, it would be bad enough, but sadly it's not. I drove home, and of course when I got there, I fell asleep immediately. But I woke up about an hour or two later to the sound of a truck engine running very loudly. I looked out of my bedroom window to the street. I saw a truck sitting on the street in front of my window. In the front seat was the same man staring at me. He still had that blank look on his face. Almost right away after I looked at him, he screeched his tires and sped away. I've never been able to figure out who this man was or what he wanted from me, but I never did see him again. I used to work as a forest ranger in the Northwest a couple of years ago. I worked in an area with tons and tons of dense woods and several campsites and parks nearby as well. One night, probably around midnight, I was driving my truck down one of the quiet roads surrounded by woods when I noticed something on the road up ahead. As I got closer, I saw it was a man standing barely on the road and waving his arms over his head. I slowed down my vehicle, and as I approached the man, I saw him start pointing down into the woods. You really couldn't see more than a foot or so in the woods because of how dense it was this time of year, and with it being nighttime. As soon as I pulled over to the side of the road, I didn't even have time to get out of my truck before the man took off running into the woods. I was a little taken back by this, and I figured the man was in some kind of trouble. I got out my flashlight and looked to where the man had entered the woods. It wasn't a real path, but the brush and trees had been moved back in a way that it made a path through all the trees going deeper into the woods. I could see the man moving through the woods, and I called out to him if he needed help. The man yelled back to me that I had to come quick, and then he said something that sounded like his friend needed help, although I didn't really hear him very well. I followed quickly with tree branches and brush hitting me in the face and body as I did. I walked back for probably a minute or two before I completely lost sight of the man. He seemed to go off into a clearing of some sort. When I arrived at the clearing, I saw there was about 20 feet of open space. The grass in the area had been flattened a little. I shined my flashlight around this otherwise completely dark woods, expecting to see the man. However, after shining the light in all directions, I didn't see him. I scanned all over in the thick woods. I didn't see the man at all, so I stopped and listened. There was just silence. Then I started hearing noise in the woods behind me to where the path I came from was. I turned around and barely saw what appeared to be someone dodge the beam of my light and go deeper into the woods. I then heard more movements on the complete other side of the woods and flashed my light to see at least 2 people dart in different directions deeper into the woods. I announced myself as a forest ranger in a loud voice and told them whoever was there to come out. Instead, I just heard movements going farther away in all different directions. I got a bad feeling about the situation and figured it would be best for me to go back to my truck and get the local police department involved. I walked rather quickly back through the path and finally got back to my truck, which was still parked on the side of the road. I got inside and reported the situation. Then I waited until several units arrived. When they got there, we talked briefly. I drove down the road to inspect the rest of the area. About a mile or so down the road, I came across a car that was parked on the side. but it was more like off the road and was kind of sticking out of the woods. I went around and saw that there was nobody in the car, and it seemed to be abandoned. I called out asking if anybody was nearby, but I got no response. The plates of the car ended up being run, and it turned out to be a stolen vehicle. Nobody really turned up anything that night, and after that, the investigation fell out of my hands. I've been a park ranger for many years, but this story I'm about to tell you happened on just my first year of the job. I was young and relatively new to things. I was working at a large state park that also had a campsite nearby. At the time, I worked mainly nights, and I didn't mind it, but it did get a little bit spooky for me at times. On this one night, I was walking near one of the campsites like I often did at that time. I was headed back towards the park. It took me about 20 minutes to get back to the park. About halfway through the walk, I was startled by a noise coming from behind me. I looked over my shoulder and saw what appeared to be eyes staring back at me. It was too dark to see anything other than that, though. The eyes appeared to be next to a large tree. I knew it was some kind of animal, so I wasn't that concerned at all. But then I saw the eyes move from next to one tree to another tree that was closer to me. But the way it moved, it was just as if it sort of glided over. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. At that point, I reached for my flashlight without taking my eyes off of what I was seeing. I shined it to the area, and when I did, whatever was there completely disappeared. I saw nothing at all, and I didn't see any leaves or trees move as if something was running away. I suddenly felt pretty spooked. I asked if anyone was there, but I heard nothing. I shook my head and continued to walk back to the park, but at a faster speed. I told myself I was a park ranger and I shouldn't be scared, even though I was new to the job. Another minute later or so, I heard the noises again, this time in the woods beside me. I quickly looked over again, just in time to see a giant log flying directly towards me. The log looked to be huge. I scrambled to get out of the way and fell over trying to avoid it. It hit part of my arm as I fell to the ground, but luckily most of it missed me. It hurt pretty bad because of the size of the log. It had to be a good 5 feet long. I got up and ran to the nearest park building, where I called in to another ranger. We went back and examined the area, but found nothing suspicious. I have no idea what happened that night. I can't imagine anybody who could have the strength or the size to throw that log at me. I used to work summers at a park. I was hoping to become a park ranger after graduating college, and this was the closest I could get to doing it at the time. The park I worked at had a lake and a large wooded area with several paths going through it. My main job was to sit in a small building and collect money from cars as they entered the park, and then I would give them their parking passes. When the park would close, I was sort of a maintenance person, and I would go around the park in a golf cart to make sure everything was in order. Usually that meant picking up trash and things like that. One night, after a relatively normal day of work, I was on the golf cart driving through some of the paths in the woods. I drove past a few of the docks near the lake, and as I did, I heard some really loud splashing in the water. I figured someone was still fishing, so I stopped and then put the golf cart in reverse to let whoever was there know that the park was closed. I parked next to the entrance and walked onto the dock to see a man sitting at the end. I called out to him, and he turned around. He seemed to be pretty surprised to see me. He was wearing sunglasses and had a big hat. He also had a pretty long beard. It seemed strange, but I wasn't there to judge people. I just told him that the park was closed, and he responded by asking me if I could give him a lift back, pointing at my golf cart. He looked nice enough, so I said sure, and he hopped on next to me. He apologized for being out so late and said he had completely lost track of the time. I told him it was fine and not to worry about it. As we began to drive back, he started asking me questions about myself. I told him I was training to be a ranger one day and that I was currently in school. He then suddenly yelled to look out and pointed to the side of the path. I looked and saw a man from another connecting path wearing all black and a ski mask. He jumped in front of us and I stopped the golf cart. As I did, He approached, and then I felt the man I had picked up grab me from behind. The next thing I knew, I was pushed into the back of the golf cart, and the man in the ski mask got in the driver's seat. The other man held my arm so I couldn't escape. They demanded my phone, and then took it and threw it out into the woods as they drove down the paths. I was terrified, and I didn't know what was going to happen. We drove for about a minute or so, when we suddenly pulled to the side of the road. The man released his grip from my arm and shouted at me to just get out of here. I took off running and ran all the way back to my car, which was the only one left in the parking lot. I drove home and then called the police. I'm sure by the time they got to the park, the men were long gone, but I gave as best a description of the one I saw as I could. I don't know why the men decided to let me go, but I'm really happy they did. This happened when I was in the 5th grade. I was in a science class, and one day we all took a field trip to a science museum. It had a bunch of exhibits and things like that. I really wasn't much of a science fan, but I will admit that I always liked going to the museum because it was pretty fun. We left school and drove down to the museum, which was about 30 minutes away. Once we got there, we did the usual stuff. We were able to kind of split up as a group, as long as we made it back. I went with a few of my friends in the class from one spot to another. Eventually, it was time to get lunch, and then we would leave shortly after that. Our teacher went around letting everyone know we would be leaving in 10 minutes and to meet back at the entrance. I had seen everything I was going to see, so I decided to just go back and get on the bus. That way I could play some games on my phone until we were going to leave. I left the building into the back parking lot where our bus had dropped us off. I got out there and saw a couple of buses. I started to walk over and saw the bus driver wave me over to him. I got on the bus, but as I did, the bus driver stopped me. He told me there would be no phones on the way back. I was pretty upset to hear this, and I didn't understand why, but I gave him my phone and then sat down. The bus driver then started the engine. I looked out the window and tried to think of why we weren't allowed to have our phones. Sure, sometimes the kids would get out of control with them, but I found this a little bit unreasonable. Just then, I felt the bus start to move. I looked and saw the driver was driving out of the parking lot and down to the street. I called out that the rest of the class was still inside, but he ignored me. Then I got a terrible feeling. I asked him to stop the bus and go back, but he just turned around and yelled at me to shut up. The bus was driving down the street and headed for the freeway. All I could do was look out the window and wonder what exactly was going on. I wished that I hadn't gone to the bus by myself and went back with the rest of the group. The bus driver merged onto the freeway, and we started going at a fairly high speed. The longer we drove, the more scared that I got. Now I knew the real reason he had taken my phone from me. We continued down the freeway for I would say about 5 minutes. Suddenly, I heard the noise of a police siren. I looked behind me and saw a flashing light. The bus started to move to the side of the road, and I saw a police car go with it. That was one of the greatest feelings in my life. The bus driver then opened the door and took off running into the field beside the road. I saw several police officers run after him, and another run to the bus. They were able to get me back to safety, and the bus driver was caught a short time later. Back when I was a kid, we took a school field trip to the zoo one time. My school was really small, and basically the entire place went. It took us over an hour to get there, but when we were there, it was a day-long event, which was nice for us because we didn't actually have to do any schoolwork. I think I was like 8 years old, and I was one of the younger people there. The first part of the day we spent looking for a bunch of animals, then we got food. After that, we started looking more at plants and things like that. I was more into the animals, so my friend Matt and I went back over to them. We first got back to the exhibit of sea lions. and when we got there, one of the zoo workers asked us if we wanted to help feed the animals. Of course we said yes, because as an 8-year-old kid, it seemed like something super fun to do. He told us to follow him and then led us into a doorway and down a dark and quiet hall. It was really weird to be in the back of an exhibit, but it got me really excited to feed the animals. We followed the guy deeper in and into a storage type of room that was even darker. He said this is where they kept the food. He told us to wait there for a second and left the room. Then we saw the door shut and heard it lock. We immediately knew something was wrong. I went to the door and tried to open it, but it was in fact locked. It was a really strong and thick door, and neither of us would be able to break it. We banged on it, but I don't know how anyone else outside would be able to hear. After a while of that with no response, we decided to examine the room. It was very dark with no apparent lights, and we could barely see. It was probably just about 15 feet by 10 feet, and had basically just junk laying around. It just seemed to be another storage closet. We waited and waited, but of course, the guy never came back, and nobody else did either. This was kind of a long time ago, and neither of us had cell phones we could take out to call anyone or anything like that. We just waited in the dark room for what felt like forever. Occasionally we would yell or bang on the door, but nothing would ever happen. We did this for literally hours. At one point we stopped and actually fell asleep on the floor for some time. Eventually we got back up and went back to banging on the door and yelling. At last, finally, we could barely hear someone from the other side. We both yelled as loud as we possibly could. The door tried to open, but was still locked. Then whoever was there went away. We got really disappointed and thought that was it, until a few minutes later we saw the door open. There was another zoo worker, and she asked us how we had gotten in there. We told her the story, and she seemed really surprised. By that time, we saw that the sun was almost set when we got back into the zoo. Apparently, everyone had been looking for us for over 2 hours. We were able to get back home later that day, but the guy that worked there and locked us in had left, and nobody could find him. It turns out he was caught a while later, and had been addicted to some drugs or something like that. They said he had been acting really strange lately. I really don't know why he locked us in there, but we were very lucky to get out because that closet wasn't really used by the zoo anymore. This story happened many years ago when I was a boy. I was probably about 9 or 10, and I remember for class we went on a field trip to one of the state parks. It was just a field trip where we were going to walk around and look at the sights and the wildlife. We went on these trips about 4 times a year, and it was always pretty fun. On this day, we went to a park that had a bunch of hills and different types of trees. We were going to walk on a path all around it. There was about 20 of us in the class, and after we all got to the park, our teacher told us to follow him and then led us down the path. I was with my best friend Daryl, and we were talking during the walk. At one point, we saw a cool-looking mushroom a little bit off the path, so we stayed back to look at it. The rest of the class was going uphill, and before we knew it, they were out of sight. We went to run to catch back up with them, but we heard a noise coming from behind a tree off the path. I expected to see an animal, but when we looked, there was a boy there around our age. He had a red shirt and jeans, and he was hiding behind the tree. He wasn't in our class. We asked him who he was, but he didn't answer. We thought maybe he was with another school field trip over here or something like that. Daryl asked him if he was on a field trip, and the boy stepped out from the tree and said, "No, Daryl." Daryl was really surprised that the kid knew his name, and he asked him how he knew. The boy then looked at me and said my name. It was a little strange, this whole thing, and we said we should all go back with our groups. The boy then went back behind the tree. He was definitely sketchy, but we told him he should come with us because we figured he wasn't supposed to be off the path by himself out here. He didn't come out from behind the tree though, so me and Daryl walked over to him. But when we got behind the tree, the boy wasn't there. It was as if he just vanished into thin air and was gone. Daryl and I looked around for a bit, but then we knew we had to get back to our group, so we ran back. We told our teacher about it, and I know we ended up telling people who worked at the park about the kid, but I never heard anything about it after that. Daryl and I still talk about it sometimes to this day. In high school, when I was a junior, I took a psychology class. It was my second period of the day. I liked the class, and one of the best things about it was that we were able to take open book tests. The teacher was really chill and let us work together on stuff, including the tests. We also had an option to take the tests in study rooms, which I always did, because it was much more quiet and I just felt more comfortable in there. I was the only person in the class who did this though, because you needed a pass and the study rooms were all the way in the basement of the school. I guess most students just found that a hassle and would rather work with each other as well. Anyways, one particular Friday, when we had a test to take, I did the usual thing, which was to get the test from the teacher and then go down to the study room. It took me about 5 minutes to get down there. There wasn't a whole lot at all on that level of the school. Pretty much just the study rooms and then a couple of storage rooms and some old classrooms that weren't used. I got into one of the rooms and turned on the light. The rooms had carpet floors with a table and a few chairs in each one. They also had a little window for looking out into the hallway. I began the test and searched through my psychology book for the answers. I remember I had just reached question 15 when I suddenly heard over the intercom that we were entering a lockdown. I got a little nervous, but I told myself it was probably nothing. I turned the lights off like we were instructed to, but I didn't see a lock on the door. Our school was kind of old and these study rooms were sort of outdated. I went under the desk and decided to play some games on my phone to pass the time. Several minutes went by without anything happening. Then I heard some footsteps coming down the hallway. I got really nervous knowing the footsteps likely belonged to someone that wasn't supposed to be in the school. I turned my phone off and I got really quiet. The footsteps went down towards the door of my study room. As I hid under the table, I slowly turned my head to look towards the window, and just as I did, I saw a man walk past it. All I could tell is that he was wearing a hooded sweatshirt, really. He walked past without looking in the window, but it still scared me a lot. Then I heard the door open in the room across the hall from mine, and then it shut. He must have gone in it, and at that point, I was seriously considering making a run for it. I was relatively fast, but I didn't know who this guy was. I was trying to psych myself up into running when I heard the door open once again and then shut. I buried my face into the ground and held my breath. I didn't really hear any footsteps though, so I lifted my head slightly to listen. I didn't know whether he had walked away or if he was just standing there. This made it much more risky for me to try to run away, so I decided to stay put for the time. Several minutes went by and I got more and more nervous. I decided once again I was going to try to run back upstairs, and this time I was going to actually do it. I didn't bother getting my backpack or anything, besides just my phone, wallet, and keys. I slowly crawled up the carpet to the door, and then stood up, careful not to make a sound. I then placed my hands on the doorknob. The second it started to turn, I heard it creak, and it sounded extremely loud. At that moment, I knew there was no turning back. I quickly left the room, and then headed down the hallways. Once I saw it was clear, I started sprinting towards the stairs, which were about 50 feet away. As I was running, I looked down one hallway to my right while passing by, and saw the man walking out of a room about 20 feet down the hallway. I ran even faster the rest of the ways and didn't look back. I sprinted up the stairs all the way back to my classroom. Once I got there, I pounded on the door yelling that it was me, and after about 10 seconds, I was let in. I told the teacher what had happened, and she alerted the principal. Police were able to get into the basement and locate the man, who was later found hiding in the same study room I had been in. Apparently, the man had broken into the school and beat up one of the teachers, then ran off. They had been searching the school, but hadn't made it to the basement yet. Every time I went near the basement of the school for the rest of my high school career, I would think about that day. This story happened in my freshman year of high school. I had recently moved to a new city and was unfamiliar with things. It was kind of tough for me being at a new school and having to make new friends and whatnot. One day, I had to make up a test, so I went to the history department to take it during my study hall time. And when I was done, I had to make it up to my next class, which was geography. As I was walking, I heard over the speakers that we were on a lockdown. I tried to hurry and make it to my class, but I guess it was farther away than I thought, and it took me a little longer than I expected. The hallways were already completely empty because classes were in session. I got more and more nervous the longer I was out in the hallways because I knew I wasn't supposed to be there. Then I saw a teacher come around a corner and see me. He looked surprised to see me, and I almost tried to run away, but I realized it would probably just get me in trouble. So I explained to the teacher I was just trying to get to my class. He said I shouldn't be out in the halls and that I was in trouble. He then told me to come with him, so I began to follow him down the halls. We walked to the end of the hall and down the stairs. Then he went to an exit of the school and started to walk out. I was a little surprised, but I figured maybe we were in a serious lockdown and we were supposed to leave the school. Just as we got out the door, though, the man grabbed my arm. Once he did, I got a terrible feeling. We walked a few steps into the parking lot until I heard a voice yell, "Hey," at us. Then someone yelled at the man to let me go. The man did and then took off running past the parking lot. Another teacher then rushed out to me and asked me if I was all right. I was fine, but very shocked at what had just taken place. The school stayed under a lockdown until they were able to make sure the area was clear. The school didn't have the best of security at the time, and the man had pretty much just walked right into the school. The scary part is, I don't know if he was ever caught. Years ago, when I was in high school, we were having a very normal day. I was in my 5th hour class, which was my last class of the day, so I was excited to go home. It was gym class, and we happened to be outside playing Foursquare in one of the parking lots behind the school. It wasn't that long into the game when suddenly our teacher, Mr. Watson, told us all to stop our games and listen up. He announced that the school was in a lockdown, and we all needed to go inside and he would get us to a classroom. I wasn't too excited about this, and I was afraid we would be locked down until after school was supposed to get out. Mr. Watson began waving us all inside, and as he was distracted, I saw an opportunity to run away and get to my car. I know it was a dumb thing to do, but I was scared of the lockdown, and I was already outside, so I decided to make a run for it. Mr. Watson didn't even notice me leaving, and I began making my way to my car. At our high school, it costed a lot of money to park in the school parking lot, so they had a free one that was farther away that I parked at. The only problem was to get there it was maybe about a 10-minute walk, and it went through the woods a little bit. I jogged down the path and through the woods. I had to stop and start walking to catch my breath from the run. I stopped to text my best friend Casey that I had left the school and asked what the lockdown was for. As I was standing there on the path, though, I started to hear some noises coming towards me. It sounded like another person running. I figured it was another student running away like I had to go to their car. I looked into the direction of the noise, and I could see through the trees where the path curved that it was a grown man running. Immediately, I got a bad feeling, and I jumped behind a tree in the woods. The man slowed down and came around the corner. I held my breath and hoped that he wouldn't see me. He had dark hair and a goatee, and walked a ways past me. He kept looking over his shoulder, and then it sounded like he went into the woods because I heard trees and brush being moved around. Then the noises stopped. I waited there and was hoping to hear him walk away, but I heard nothing. It sounded like he had gone just inside the woods, about 30 or 40 feet down the path from where I went in. The trees were pretty thick in this area, and it was a good place to hide, but I didn't dare move or make a sound. I really just wanted to go to my car and drive away. I realized the mistake that I had made by running from class now, but it was too late to do anything about it. I sat there for a few minutes, and I knew the man was still there, but I was sure that he hadn't seen me. I debated in my mind between running back to school or trying to make a run for my car, but they both seemed pretty risky, and I didn't want to take a chance. So I remained hiding there, trying my best to stay silent, because any movement I made would make noises with all the trees and branches in there. I occasionally heard noises from where the man had gone in, pretty much confirming to me that he was still there. After what had to be at least 5 to 10 minutes of hiding, I started to hear police sirens off in the distance. They got closer and closer and seemed to be heading for the school. The sound of those sirens made me feel a little bit safer and more brave, so I then decided I was going to run back towards the school. I took a deep breath, and on the count of 3, I made a run for it back to the path towards the school. I heard the man start to move in the woods when I started running, but I couldn't tell if he was chasing after me or moving in another direction. I didn't look back at all and ran my fastest until I had made it up to the school. I saw the police officers arriving, and I ran up to one of them and told them about the man in the woods. They had me wait with some other officers for a while. The man had made a run for it, but he ended up being caught a short time later deeper into the woods. Apparently he had been trying to get into the school and had actually broken a window. My mom came and picked me up, and I had to get my car later when the area was cleared for us to return. This story took place 2 summers ago. I was walking my dog Albert one night after work. It was something that I did almost every day. Usually I would walk Albert earlier, but I had been working late that day, so I went out just as the sun was setting at about 8:30 p.m. or so. I would walk around the neighborhood and into some other neighborhoods that were close by. It was a pretty nice area with a lot of houses, and normally I'd see a few other people out walking dogs and such, but at this time it was pretty empty. I went about 30 minutes out, but before turning back, I let Albert run around in the grass a little. As I did, I noticed something off in the distance. It was someone wearing a clown costume. The costume was really well done. He was wearing a whole clown outfit, and instead of a mask, appeared to have his whole face painted, and was also wearing a wig. It seemed really weird to me immediately, because it wasn't Halloween, and he didn't appear to be with anyone. He just seemed to kind of be walking up and down the street. Unfortunately for me, I had to walk past him to get home. I waited there at the park for a few minutes to see if he would walk away first, but then Albert seemed to notice him and let out a few barks. Albert is a French bulldog, so he's pretty small and not very intimidating, but he still likes to bark at people a lot. As he did, I saw the clown stop walking and turn his head over to look at us. He then turned his head back and walked away. Once he was gone, I headed back with Albert. I didn't notice the clown at all anymore until about 10 minutes later. I heard the sound of someone walking behind me, not very close, maybe about 100 feet back or so. Immediately, I got a bad feeling that it was the clown. I didn't want to stop and look behind me, so I just kept walking until I got to the next street corner, and when I did, I casually looked behind me to see that it was in fact the clown that was walking behind me. I continued to walk home with the clown tailing a far ways back. The longer he followed me and the closer I got to home, the more nervous I became. For a few minutes, I didn't hear the clown at all, so I turned around and was relieved to not see anyone. But just a few minutes later, I heard the footsteps once again. Then, out of nowhere, I heard the sound of the footsteps change to the sound of someone running. I looked behind me and saw the clown running directly at me and Albert with a huge, creepy grin on his face. At that point, I knew nothing else but to start running myself. I sprinted as fast as I could. Luckily, I'm in pretty good shape, and so is Albert. Even though his legs are pretty short, he was able to keep up with me as I sprinted down the street. I took a turn at the next block, and even though it wasn't the way home, I was trying to lose the clown. Then when I was at the end of that street, I turned again. At last, I stopped hearing the clown and looked behind me to see that he was finally gone. I walked a few more blocks and then went back to the way home. I was checking my surroundings constantly the entire way back. I was so glad to make it back safely without the clown following us, and decided I would try to avoid walking Albert at night from then on. I went to bed that night and slept great. But when I woke up the next morning, I opened the blinds to my bedroom window and noticed something. On my bedroom window, there was a balloon with the string taped to it. I got the chills when I saw it. The creepiest part is that I had slept with my windows cracked open all night, something that I often did during the summertime to get some fresh air in the house. I figured it had to be the clown that left the balloon, and it creeps me out thinking he was outside my window that night. But who he was or what he wanted, I still don't know. My wife and I live somewhat out in the country. It's not super out there, but we have a decent-sized yard with a woods on our property, and we don't have too many houses on our street. One night, my wife had gone to bed already, and I was staying up late watching a sports game on TV in the living room. When the game was over, I turned off the TV and then turned off the lights in the living room. As the lights went out, that gave me a clear image of our front yard, and something caught my eye as it did. I noticed there was someone dressed as a clown, complete with a mask and everything, just standing in the front yard staring directly at me. It was extremely unusual in my neighborhood to see anybody walking down the street, and we had a fairly long driveway, so I was shocked at the sight of a clown in the front yard. He didn't take his eyes off me, and I walked over to the front door. The closer I got, the creepier the clown looked, and I opened the front door just slightly and stuck my head out. He was pretty far away, but I wasn't going to take any chances. I had planned to yell at the clown and ask him who he was and what he wanted, but shortly after I opened the front door, I saw the clown run away and disappear off into the woods. Now this was also concerning, as those were our woods, but I hoped he would just run off and that would be that. I stayed up a little while longer, even went all around the house making sure every window and door was locked before finally deciding I would head to bed. I fell asleep rather quickly, but was woken up sometime in the night by my wife. She said to me, "Do you hear that?" I listened closely, but heard nothing. She then told me that she woke up to what sounded like someone knocking on the front door. Just then, there was more knocking. It was like a really fast and constant knock. Not a very hard knock, but just very constant and rather fast. This time, the knock continued for a good 15 seconds straight before stopping. I figured it had to be the clown. I told my wife about seeing the clown in the yard, and she suggested calling the police. I slowly got out of bed as the knocking started up again. This time the knocking did not stop and just continued at the same fast pace that it had been at before. It was seeming like it was slowly getting louder and louder. I slowly walked towards the living room and tried my best to remain out of sight the entire time of the clown. Once I got there, I could barely see that it was in fact the clown that had returned to the window of the front door. As he continued to knock, I started to hear laughing from the clown, a really creepy laugh. At that point, I yelled in a loud and firm voice that I had already called the police and they were on their way. Of course, I hadn't actually called the police yet, but I wanted to see if I could scare him off. It seemed to work, because I didn't hear any more knocking after that, and he seemed to walk away. I don't know why that clown went to our house, or how he even found us. This story happened years ago when I was a kid. I think I was about 10 years old or so. I remember that my parents took me to this really big park that was sort of near our house. We lived kind of by the city, so the parks were always really crowded. It was a weekend, so the park was especially busy. I think there was some kind of event going on, because there was people everywhere. I remember noticing a clown almost immediately and the clown waving at me. I was kind of creeped out by clowns, so I sort of waved and then walked away. Me and my parents walked towards another area of the park, where there was a bunch of stuff going on, such as games and even a live band in one area. We played a few games and walked around. There was some food and things like that. It was overall a fun time, and eventually we left to go to the grocery store. After we were done shopping, we were walking back to our car when I noticed there was a van parked a few spaces away from us. And just for a second, I looked over and thought I saw the clown in the driver's seat duck down. It was a little odd to see a clown driving a van. But like I said before, I wasn't much of a fan of clowns, so I just put it out of my head, and me and my parents went home. Later that night at home after dinner, I went outside to play around with my basketball hoop in the driveway like I often did. But when I got outside, I saw a van across the street parked on the side of the road, and once again the clown was driving. He ducked down again when I saw him, but this time he raised his head back up slowly and smiled at me. Then he began to wave. I ran back inside the house as fast as I could and told my parents, but by the time they made it outside, we all saw the van driving away down the street. He never did come back after that, thankfully, but I get creeped out thinking back on that every time. This happened a few years ago when Fortnite really started blowing up and everyone was playing it. I played on my PC, and I would play it in my room almost every single night. Mostly it was with my friends, but I also played a lot by myself in solos or duos, and sometimes I would even do squads with random people. This story happened to be a late night when I was playing duos with random people. I started a game with a guy, and everything was normal until my game started to lag when I got near my partner. It was unusual for my game. It usually ran just fine. I noticed that he had a microphone, and I did as well, so I told him that my game was lagging. He replied in a super deep voice, and I honestly didn't hear anything he said because the audio was so weird. His voice was really deep. It sounded like he was using some sort of voice changer, and there was also an echo when he spoke. I ran away from him on the game, and then things started to work well again and stopped lagging. But the weird thing I noticed was every time I went near him in my game, it would start to lag or glitch. He started to talk more throughout the game in the same weird and deep voice. I understood only a few things that he said. At one point, he simply said, "Red shirt." I thought nothing of it until I realized that I happened to be wearing a red shirt. Not my Fortnite character though, but me in real life. This was a little weird, but I figured it was some sort of a coincidence. Overall, this guy was just starting to creep me out as I played with him. I took a look at his username to tell one of my friends about the strange guy I was playing with, but then I noticed something. At first glance, the username just looked like random letters. But when I looked closer at the name, I realized that it was my real first and last name spelled completely backwards. I noticed it because of a weird letter combination I had in my last name. Now I was officially creeped out. I decided to ask the man on the headset who he really was, but just as I started asking him, my computer suddenly crashed. I was startled, and I decided to just leave my computer off for the night. I didn't play Fortnite for a while after that. A few weeks ago, I was playing Fortnite by myself in my room. I live alone, and at the time, I'd been playing Fortnite for several hours already. Fortnite is one of my favorite games to play, along with Call of Duty from my Xbox. I don't know what exact time it was, but I'm guessing it was close to midnight. I was playing with my headphones in, but I thought I heard what sounded like a knock coming from my window. It freaked me out a little bit. I turned around and looked, but I had my blinds covering most of my window, so I could only see out of a tiny part. I went over and lifted the blinds to look around outside. There was a bush that was kind of next to my window, but I didn't really think it could have made the noise. But as I looked around the yard, I couldn't see anyone. It was very dark and quiet out at this time. I figured it had to be just a bug flying into the window, so I went back to playing Fortnite. About 15 minutes later, I heard another noise. It was a louder knock, but not on my bedroom window. It sounded like it was coming from a window at the back of my house. I have a pretty small house, so I can hear noises from just about every room if it's loud enough. Now I was very concerned. I got up and slowly opened the door to my room. All the lights to my house were off because I was planning to just play Fortnite until I got tired and go to sleep. I went down my hall to an angle that I could see my back window at. When I looked, I couldn't really see anything. I flicked on the hall light and then turned on every single light in the house. I hoped if anyone was there, they would get off my property after seeing I was home. I didn't hear any noises for a while after that, so I decided to just try to go to bed. I turned my light off and got in bed. As I laid down, I closed my eyes to try to fall asleep. I was slightly paranoid from the noises I had heard, but I told myself it would be just fine. I was laying facing my window and suddenly saw a shadow on the other side of my blinds. I slowly moved my blinds to make sure it was nothing, but when I did, I saw a hand grab the ledge of my window. I thought I was going to have a heart attack in that moment. I jumped up and out of bed and turned the light back on to my room. Then I screamed at the top of my lungs that I was calling the police. I then heard some noise from my front yard of possibly someone running. I sat in my room looking around for what had to be an hour. I didn't actually call the police, but I told myself if I saw or heard anything more that I would. I ended up staying up literally all night. I think I was able to prevent a possible break-in, and I really hope whoever that was doesn't come back. I just recently graduated from college, and this is a story of what took place a couple of years ago. I had a PlayStation 4 that I shared with my older brother at my parents' house. We played it quite a bit, and I had it in my bedroom, which was in the basement. My brother and I basically had the whole basement to ourselves, and after my first year of college, he ended up getting a job and moving away, leaving the basement all to myself. It was pretty nice, but I ended up not bringing my PS4 to college because I was really busy and I knew it would distract me a lot. When I did play on my PlayStation, I would play Fortnite a lot with my friends. One day in May, when the school year was just about over, I got a text message from my friend Jake asking me if I was back from school. I told him no, and he responded by saying he saw I had been playing Fortnite the night before. We were PlayStation friends, so we could see when I was playing certain games. This confused me because I wasn't back yet. I realized my brother must have come back home and played on my account, so that's what I told Jake. Several days later, though, I was done with school, and I drove the 3 hours back home to my parents' house. When I got to my bedroom to unpack my stuff, I saw that my room was a little messy and some things were out of order. I texted my brother, giving him a hard time for leaving the bedroom a mess. He responded by telling me he hadn't been home recently. I asked my parents about it, and they said they hadn't even been in my bedroom in a few weeks. When they said that, I suddenly got a little creeped out. I went back to my room and looked around silently. I knew things just weren't how I left them. I walked out of the room to the bathroom down the hall. As I was in there, I knew I heard the distinct noise of my closet door to my bedroom being opened. I ran to the bathroom door and locked it. Thankfully, I had my phone in my pocket, and I used it to text my parents who were upstairs that someone was definitely in my bedroom. Just a few moments later, I heard the doorknob to the bathroom turn until the lock stopped it. At that point, I texted my parents to call the police. I could feel that there was someone right on the other side of the bathroom door. They weren't making any noise, but neither was I. I didn't know who it could possibly be or if they were dangerous. I sat there hoping that they wouldn't try to break the door down and waiting for the police to come. I was expecting whoever it was to walk away or to try to get in the bathroom once again or do anything, but they didn't. They just stood there silently. At one point, I thought they had walked away, until I looked under the crack of the bathroom door and could just barely see their feet still there. Finally, after what felt like forever, I heard noises from upstairs, followed by someone shouting police. After some time, I was told it was safe to come out, and saw them leading away a skinny-looking guy who appeared to be pretty young. They had found a man who had somehow gotten into our house and had been basically living in my room for 2 weeks.